Hi, I'm Cary Stamp. Most of us are familiar with the TED Talk by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about my story and my why, and why I became a financial advisor more than 30 years ago. You see, I grew up in Iowa. I grew up in the west side of Des Moines, Iowa, and my grandfather was a fairly well-known dentist in another small town called Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, people would walk around the town and they'd see people walking around with gold teeth. And if somebody had a gold tooth, they pretty much knew that my grandfather, Meyer Schaefer, was most likely the guy that had given them their gold tooth. Don't know why, but he always enjoyed being known as the guy that gave people their gold tooth. Unfortunately, his skills with investing were far, far inferior to his skills as a dentist. He would make the worst possible decisions. Anybody that cold called him, he would take the call. If they had a great story about something that was going to the moon, he would buy it. In fact, if you come into my office, you'll see an entire wall filled with stock certificates of companies that have gone out of business. Those were all companies that my grandfather invested in. So when I was in my early 20s, and my grandfather, in his mid-70s at that time, he'd had a stroke. And at the time he had a stroke, he was no longer able to practice. In fact, he practiced until he was 74 years old. He has a stroke. We find out that he has a fairly substantial IRS debt. And the IRS has come and they said that they're going to put a lien on his house. Nobody in the family knew what to do or how to figure this out, so I said, I'm going to take this one. I called the rest of the family. His children, his cousins, his siblings, anybody that I could get a hold of. We put together a fund, which essentially back then was like a GoFundMe, to bail out the family house. Now, it didn't give them quite enough to retire on. It was not a very successful or enjoyable retirement, but at least we stopped the IRS at that particular moment from taking his house away. And I said to myself, I don't want to live like this when I'm in my 70s. I looked at my parents, and my parents were a homemaker. My mother also had a small business, and my father, who drove a train for the railroad. And in many cases, even though my father earned a pretty good wage, there was often more month than money left at the end of the month. And so I looked and I said, I need to create an environment for myself and some systems for myself where this doesn't pass down to me. So I decided I was going to be a financial advisor. I learned about money, about living below your means, about the time value of money, about investing, and how to use interest in your favor as opposed to paying interest and letting other people use it as a weapon against you for their own enrichment. That's my why. It's based on a couple of generations of watching people do things that I wanted to change. I hope I've passed this value down to my daughter. I hope I've passed it to my clients, and I certainly hope that I've passed it to the team that works with me at Cary Stamp and Company. I appreciate your time. I know you've got your own why. This is mine.